Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Today, we are going to be talking about two things, these current events, these two huge current events that we're getting hit by right now. Number one is this Hurricane Helene. The storm right now is up in the Carolinas. We're going to be talking about the damage and the effect that it had on trucking and on shipping as a whole here in the United States. And we're also going to be talking about the port strikes that look like they're pretty imminent coming Tuesday. Now, these port strikes are for the 14 major ports all the way from Boston over to Houston, and they're going to have a severe impact on all of the imports and exports on the East Coast, 43% of what the United States does. That's a big deal. And today we're going to be talking about the unions as well. And so I have Julian with me, and Julian is an ex-union member. So he's worked at companies and been part of the union in the past. He knows both sides of it. He's going to help me through some of these. I have some questions for him. We're going to start off right now, though, talking about Hurricane Helene. So first, let me give you guys some context. This video, as of the time of recording, which right now is September 27th, Helene made landfall yesterday, and it is still wreaking havoc right now in the Carolinas. And so anything that happens from here on out, obviously the figures that I'm going to give you will only increase. But in Florida right now, we have over 1 million power outages. Okay, there's 22 million people in Florida, 1 million power outages. And so 1 million power outages, that would equate to somewhere around 5% of the population. But remember, there's 2 to 3 people per household, and these are customers. So we're really looking at over 10% of Floridians are without power right now. Then you go up to Georgia, which has about 11 million people, and they're already at 1.1 million and rising customers out of power. You could do the math on that. It's getting pretty extreme. They have half as many people and they have more power outages. All right, so they're looking somewhere close to that 20% of people in Georgia without power. You get up to South Carolina, it drops all the way down to 5 million people. And they are at 1.3 million customers out of power. So it is a big deal, especially North Carolina right now, which is getting a ton of flooding, especially up in Asheville. Some of these places, they just aren't built, and they don't expect these things because they don't happen very often. But we are here to focus on trucking. So Julian, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm not in Florida. I'm currently out, probably get some bands later today, but right now out of the main pathway of this storm here. How was your experience down in Orlando yesterday?
It was good. Matter of fact, you guys, I'll show you the before and after effect of my backyard. But don't worry, we're going to only get stronger from this. But
You'll rebuild,
luckily,
right?
yes, luckily we didn't get anything, just a little bit of wind, some rain. We got a brand new roof last month, so we are all set. But I wanted to ask you, so just so you guys know, Julian, he's been in the freight broker business now for the last 10 years about, if I'm not mistaken. It's going on 10 years next year or so 9 years.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Okay. So how do you see this affecting your book of business? How do you see this affecting carriers? How are you dealing with everything basically on the East Coast right now? Even up in Pennsylvania is going to start getting some of these bans. I don't see anywhere on the East Coast that isn't really getting affected or about to be affected this week. What does that do to the trucking market?
I mean, you can look back at past storms when we're just talking about a hurricane. I remember my first experience with a major hurricane that I remember really threw off the market was Hurricane Harvey down in Houston. Was that maybe 6-7 years ago now? But I remember that just threw the rates into a totally haywire. And that was a big turning point for me. I remember it was kind of a before and after Hurricane Harvey with the rates. It just seemed like rates went up exponentially after that point and never really went back down. And things obviously leveled out to a certain amount, but they always just seemed like they were elevated beyond what it was before that storm. And I think you could pretty much expect that with all hurricanes, whether it be on the Panhandle or in the Gulf Coast or riding up the coast. It's gonna cause volatility in the market. It's going to cause rates to rise, which in truth, if you're a shipper, it's not great news, but for us brokers and, people working kind of in the middle, this is kind of what we're looking for, a little bit more volatility in the market, a little bit more opportunity for rates to rise and, really just help shippers out of a pinch because everything has been pretty easy to move the past few months. And, this might be kind of what we need to get the market jump started with some better rates. It's never nice to see someone suffer for the benefit of another group, but I would expect this storm to do a lot of the same. And like you said, this storm is kind of acting a little bit abnormally, as most storms would. It definitely seems to be kind of really breaking apart now that it hit the mainland. And as you mentioned, a lot of these places in the kind of Appalachian Smoky Mountain area, they're getting more rain than they probably can handle right now. And, I'm sure a lot of businesses and truckers, there's going to be a lot of delays, road closures, and probably a lot of FEMA jobs are going to be popping up. And, I can definitely see that whole kind of southern Appalachia area really kind of going through a hardship through this specific storm. I don't think they're used to getting hit with this kind of ferocity we're seeing from Helene right now.
Yeah, you mentioned Harvey, which I remember Harvey. Harvey was a big deal. It did mess up rates. I say mess up. There's no messing up rates. They go up and down in supply and demand. And in this case, carriers made a lot of money, and good for them. But one thing that it is kind of different from Harvey in this is Harvey was extremely slow moving hurricane that came into Texas, and it sat and it just dumped on Texas for the longest time and moved so slow and caused all that flooding. But that's it's very different from what Helene is doing, where it came in through Florida, and then all of a sudden we wake up as a Floridian and we think, okay, it's going to be somewhere in Georgia. It's already way out. It's where they had forecasted, I thought, to be come like Saturday night, and it was already there Friday morning. It picked up speed. Right. It was moving like 30 miles an hour at one point, and maybe still is. But it just started going, and so it is doing that. It's not flooding so many areas like Harvey was, because at least it's pushing past it, but it is a massive storm, mostly north to west, north to south, right? It's not so wide, or at least we're not feeling the effects of those bands so much from east to west for whatever reason, especially east. That is a difference, right? So many places over there are being affected on the East Coast. For Harvey, it was, we need to send in FEMA, we need to send in help, and we need to get all these people these materials. But it was kind of one more concentrated area because it wasn't spreading so much. So right now, what we're seeing is a whole bunch of places on the East Coast, starting in Florida, going up, that a lot of trucks aren't going to be able to access even to get down there, because there are a lot of roads that are closed or flooded. And it's just not safe. That a lot of places are just kind of shut down and don't allow trucks, or vehicles aren't even supposed to be on the road right now. So I don't know if it is going to be quite the same. And then the other thing is, I don't know if the rate increase from the carriers is going to offset the amount of business that just can't be done by those shippers and receivers, because there's just so many. So I guess my real question for you, and the most important one, is, as a broker, how would you quote somebody, both inbound or outbound of that area? Let's just say Georgia, because it's kind of in between what we've seen so far, between, it's in the Carolinas now. If somebody wanted a truck to pick up today and deliver on Monday to Georgia, and then if somebody wanted something to pick up from Georgia and deliver somewhere else on Monday, but both pick up today, how do you quote that? How do you go about that?
It kind of seems like you don't want to fail. That's always the goal when I'm quoting, for the most part. Quote safely. And you definitely, the other side of it is you have to play with fire. You have to be a little bit competitive to win the freight. But, this might not be the time to do that. I think if you know what you're doing, you'll see this as an opportunity to keep your rates high. And, the shipper should probably acknowledge the fact that, hey, a higher rate makes sense here. If someone's quoting me too low, and I know they just dumped 10 inches of rain outside, I probably want to play it a little safer and go with the higher rate, knowing that this is probably important, it's probably delayed, and someone probably needs this product, given the fact that everyone's affected by this storm so heavily. You made a good point of this being totally different type of storm from Harvey, in that it's not as concentrated, and a lot of these, it's fast moving. So by the time Monday rolls around, this storm is probably going to be, history as far as we're concerned, and the current, it'll be a lot of recovery. We're going to see a lot of stuff today. Like we said, this is a Friday. We're going to be seeing stuff over the weekend of all the damage to the communities as this wreaks havoc up in these towns that typically aren't used to seeing this kind of weather. So I'm sure the recovery efforts will be long and intense, but it's going to be ancient history by the time Monday rolls around. I mean, now just to kind of roll into our next topic, what I don't think anyone could have prepared for, and I don't know if this probably has never even happened before in the history of shipping and storms, and correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I'm sure people have been doing this for a lot longer than me, but to be compounded with a hurricane and a port strike all in the vicinity of a couple days of each other, the chaos that this has caused is nothing short of madness. Yesterday, at least for the Florida ports, I know I do a lot out of Tampa, and they were shut down completely yesterday and for the morning of today. So, you have customers who, they're fighting last free day. The customers themselves a lot of them closed yesterday as well. So it was just, in these crucial times, trying to everyone hustle out this freight before the strike hits, which is Tuesday. You have this huge monkey wrench thrown into the entire operation, where the port, you lose an entire day from the port, you lose an entire day delivering to customers, and then, you have to now fit in getting that container out, delivered, and back before that strike happens on Tuesday. And like you said, a lot of these, I just delivered something into Middle Tennessee today, Cleveland, Tennessee. And that was a drayage run from the Port of Savannah. By the grace of God, I got that container out and delivered this afternoon. But that driver is going to be probably, sheltering in place on his drive home with the amount of water he's going to have to drive through. And now that this is kind of out of the Gulf, a lot of these other ports are being affected a lot more today. Jacksonville, Savannah, Charleston, Norfolk, all these ports are getting battered today. And this is really the last real day of picking up your freight, other than maybe if you have something Monday where you can deliver and return same day. But this is as crucial as it gets as far as, trying to make the most out of today before that Tuesday deadline hits, where they're going to be closing up those ports. So, just to kind of reverse, how would I quote in a normal storm? We kind of went over that. But with all of this other stuff going on, this is kind of a new rule book, and you kind of really got to pull into your past experiences. And, it's kind of, if you're a new broker out there trying to learn the lay of the land, this is as hard of a time as ever. And you really got to kind of lean on your support and, whoever can kind of give you a little bit more advice on how to handle your freight. But you don't want to play around with it. A lot of customers want to play it, cheap and, leave the container in there until they can deliver the same day. This is not the time to be doing that. You want to get those containers out, delivered, and back in the port. A couple days of chassis or storage is a drop in the bucket compared to, you're now stuck with a container, and the per diem's going to start, those steamship lines, they are evil. They do not care if there's a strike, if the container melted away, and it does not matter one bit. If that container is stuck outside the port, you're going to be racking up per diem charges for your customer. Which, that's going to be putting a lot of shippers out of business as well if they get stuck. Look at Bed Bath & Beyond. They pretty much admitted to the fact they folded because of demurrage and per diem costs. And the writing is on the wall for, stuff like this to definitely happen again.
I want to touch on that, but I don't want to get too far off topic either. But do you see it where a lot of the per diems and the demurrage fees were fought, right? And they were Some of them successfully waived, and I think the people that were able to pursue them, it just took so long because it was such a big issue. And this was an issue that was going on all over the world, but in the United States, the per diems and the demurrage is something that we had to deal with. Do you think that they will be getting charged per diems at the port, or in this case, demurrage at the port if they're not able to pick up these containers? Or would the last 3 days certainly just be pushed back and back and back? Because there's no per diems until you pick it up.
Well, yeah, if you get stuck with a box where you can't return it, you're going to get stuck with per diem. But as far as a demurrage goes, I mean, the point of demurrage and per diem is to keep those containers moving and in circulation. You know what I mean? So if those things are stuck and loaded, my experience with the steamship lines is that I don't see them being nice and saying, "Oh, okay, don't worry about it. We understand you're in a strike." No, these companies are going to they don't change the rules unless it's in their benefit.
So you don't think that it'll just show not available on their website, and then eventually once it does become available, it'll say an extended free date, a new last free day to pick up?
Again, people correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of any actual knowledge of this. I haven't spoken to anyone from the steamship lines or freight forwarders, but from my experience with the steamship lines, they're extremely uncompromising, and they see that as a you problem. If you're a shipper and you wanted to avoid this, you should have shipped your product earlier, or you should have rerouted it to the West Coast. This is not like this thing popped up out of nowhere. And you tell me if you have a different of opinion on that. But I mean, even this week on the exports, they started changing the rules on me. I got stuck with a $300 bill from OOCL because I returned a container 2 hours after the cut date. Now, for the past 3 or 4 years, as long as you rail billed that container before the cut time, you were able to return that box no problem. So, we were operating on the same protocols and rules that we've been doing for the past 4 years. And now, because of the strike, I know that they are setting more of a deadline on when these containers are being returned and stuff. And again, I must have returned 100 boxes of OOCL after the actual cutoff time, just as long as it was billed in time. That's the key part there. As long as you bill it in time and you return it same day, they can accept the container, they move it on. I didn't hear so much as a peep. This was the first week. So we actually had to cancel a bunch of export loads because we can't move them on the cut day anymore because, the cut would be at 4:00 and you can't pull a box same day, drive 2 hours, load it and return it and safely ensure that it's going to be returned by that cut time. So again, I mean, they completely moved the goalpost on me here, and it resulted in the customer not being able to export their freight and, obviously me not having that freight on my board.
So I would be surprised if they started charging for demurrage. I think that would be very surprising, but I won't be surprised if the steamship line starts charging for per diems on containers that they know good and well can't be returned. That wouldn't surprise me.
These guys are licking their chops for a demurrage. They cannot wait. And I mean, also, this is the really tough part, because if you have clothes or shoes or, dry goods, it'll be fine whenever the strike gets cleared up and, that product will be used. But the refrigerated cargo, the perishables, that stuff, according to the articles I've read, they're going to be completely just stop being monitored come that Tuesday.
And there'll be a lot of claims. That'll be a lot of insurance claims.
Forget about it. Forget about it. If there's ever a reason to intervene, it's for those perishable goods, and I guess the insurance industry. I can't imagine the reckoning from hundreds and thousands of wasted reefer boxes and everything. It's crazy.
All right, so let's try to get back on topic here. When it comes to actually trucking, these truckers mostly is going to be our audience here, right? And you guys want to know, how is this going to affect you? We know that the perishables, we know the insurance company is going to be affected. We know the customers, the consumers, they're all going to be affected. All right, but how does it affect carriers specifically, not for Helene, we already talked about that, but for the port strikes, and who does it affect most? Who do you think?
I mean, the draymen, obviously. The over-the-road truckers will keep moving, but that those over-the-road freight has to come from somewhere at some point. So it'll trickle down eventually. But the the here and now. Well, I mean, I say that, but the more I think about it, the draymen are going to be out of work. What are they going to do? They're going to try to get behind the truck of an over-the-road driver, and now what? And in turn, what's that going to do to the over-the-road trucking? It's going to, then kick up that volume and
Well, it's going to increase
the
capacity,
rates.
but the demand isn't going up.
Right. Right. It'll just increase capacity, so
So rates will probably
the
go
rate increase from the storm will be counteracted by the rate decrease from the overcapacity. So again, it's kind of a weird, in the 10 years I've been doing this is definitely a first for this kind of market right now and how it's going to react to it. Do I think every drayman is going to be able to just walk into an over-the-road trucking and get hired? No, because they're already oversaturated as it is. So, I mean, long story short, the draymen will certainly be the most affected truckers for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously, hands down, it's going to be draymen because that's their whole job. It's 100% of their job. But it will trickle down. All those raw materials that come in have to go to the manufacturing plants to be able to make our goods that go onto trucks that go to deliver to other places that go to consumers, right? And so whether it be consumers or other businesses, right? So it is going to affect everybody eventually, but if this strike only goes on for a week or two, we might not see that big of a difference. We might not see that big of an impact on over-the-road stuff. It could completely avoid that. Now, if this goes on for a month or 2 months or an extended amount of time, which I don't think they'll allow it to do just because of the sheer size of this strike, all 14 ports, I don't think the government at some point has to get involved in this, I think, and say, hey, we need to open these things back up. Let's come to an agreement.
I think it's actually 30. I saw 36 East and Gulf Coast ports. I don't know what all 36 of those are, but I think every market has multiple ports.
14 major.
Yeah.
So like there's Manatee right outside of Tampa. That would be a very minor port. No big ships go into there. So,
right.
Looking at that. But yeah, obviously the draymen are going to be affected the most. But who else is really affected by this? The draymen. But the draymen work for ports and ramps. And so we've got the whole east of the Mississippi, the whole East Coast shut down. Who operates east of the Mississippi? CSX, Norfolk Southern. So those guys, they've got nothing coming in from the ports on the East Coast. All they're getting is volume from the West Coast going over to the East Coast. What's that do to them? Is this going to be immediate layoffs? How long do they keep people on until things get what's their time frame? What's their timetable of, hey, we can withstand this? But it's not looking good. If you're CSX or Norfolk Southern, you just got your income just got chopped off, right? Your incoming of goods in this case to go west or to even go north and south, you've got nothing now. That's terrible. Right. It's not that you have nothing. Sure, there's companies there on the East Coast that are just going to manufacture things and put them on. But again, a lot of those raw materials come in to make those. But yes, your volume, I would guess, is going to be 75, 80% down because most of it is absolutely going to be coming in from the ports before it goes on rail to get shipped over. So CSX, Norfolk Southern, that's not great. But guess what? It also affects Union Pacific and BNSF because they make a ton of their money at that crossover point, of the Mississippi, primarily
it's all
Chicago.
Like artery. It's all like a blood flow in your body. Yeah.
Oh now, my gosh! So rail companies will be affected drastically.
One place where they might actually benefit is, Mexico and Canada border. I'm sure a lot of shippers. We're already seeing that a lot of with the steel. A lot of it's coming in through Mexican and Canadian borders. So I personally don't think this will get drug on too much past the strike date. I think a deal will be made. Just because of the importance of it.
Right.
But in the event of it not happening, I would imagine, certain shippers will look to circumvent this by, moving things into the Canadian ports and, getting stuff from Mexico. I don't know the intricacies of that, but I would imagine that's a route that people are looking at already just to be prepared.
All right, so lastly, I'm going to ask you one question. This is going to be more of a political question. You don't have to go too far into the politics of it. No wrong answers, of course, doesn't really matter. But Biden administration came out and said they're not going to intervene. Part of me likes this, and part of me thinks, are you crazy? We're talking about every American company, every American family depends on the ports to be able to get our goods. Other countries who trade with us depend on us actually receiving those goods and sending back empty containers so that global trade can continue to work. Everything has to work together to work. That is global trade. And so to me, it's not a good look. Do I think that in this case, the government should get involved in, at least for now, okay, at least for now, saying because Helene just came through, because we need a lot of supplies that are probably on those containers. We need those containers to come in because surely there's things on those containers that people need right now to help them during this crisis that's going on, this storm, right? Should now the Biden administration come in and just say, okay, let's go ahead and just push this date, this deadline a month, and let's make sure that we get the goods that we need, at least for the people who need them, and then revisit this and then kind of wash our hands of it and say, hey, we're done? Or should they say, hey, we're going to intervene 100% because this isn't good for anybody? What are your thoughts? And actually, before you get into your thoughts, can you just explain to us what do they want? What does the union want, and what do both parties want?
Well, the union wants some basic things, and they're reluctant to accept other important things. So what they want is a wage increase. On the West Coast, the longshoremen, they agreed to a 36% increase last year for the next 6 years. But these East Coast longshoremen, they're not interested in that same parameters. They want at least $5 per hour more than what they're getting now. And they want better benefits. And they have an opposition to automation, basically. You go to the ports in the Netherlands and China and, what have you, and those ports are like in another planet compared to what we're working with here. That it just, the American way has always been, giving people jobs and job security and all that. I mean, you probably have a fraction of the amount of port workers actually working some of these ports where they've accepted these, really technological advanced machines. And, it's the same thing with the warehouse workers and the auto manufacturers and all that. They're going to be out of jobs if they let the robots and the automation do it. And I think, in my opinion, they probably see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's only so much you can do to stop a train like that from coming. It's coming whether you like it or not. You can try to slow it down, but I think to counteract that, they want to get paid. They want to make hay while the sun's out, right? Or whatever the saying is. But they want that extra wage increase here and now because who knows what the ports will look like in the next 10 years. And by that time, it's obviously kind of an older demographic, I think. I don't think too many young 20-year-olds are getting into the port business. If anything, they might be driving or something like that. But I think a lot of these guys want to just kind of see to the end of their work days and retire with good benefits and a little extra money in their pocket, and then the robots can come in. Again, that's my personal opinion of what's going on. I've worked in a union and alongside a union at a couple of my jobs in the past, and none of the guys who are union workers were young, 20, 30-year-old guys. Most of them were old, overweight, shouldn't have been working. It was, I worked for a Department of Transportation. I won't specify which one, but it was truly a joke how that job performed. Anytime you had to do something that required a little bit of strenuous labor, they would fall back on the union and say, it's too hot outside, that's too heavy. And then, obviously you can't fire these people and replace them with people that are hungry and ready to work. Once you're in that union, you're good to go. Now, on the other hand, I worked in a union where, they weren't exactly asking you to work, crazy hard. Unions were invented because, people were falling in meat grinders, in Upton Sinclair's Jungle. You can read all about that. I'm sure everyone read that in school. That's why unions were made. People would fall into a meat grinder. They would pull the next guy from outside and you're hired. The business owner could care less about the health of the workers. And when I was part of a certain union, they wouldn't even let me get 8 hours of sleep between my shifts. So, I actually did pull the union card out there, say, hey, I need a little bit more rest in between shifts or I got to get the union involved. And, I had no pushback or anything from the employer. But more than anything, I think the unions have given you a license to kind of be lazy, not work, and hold a job that you shouldn't have. So these guys really need to just get with the program. Unions, this is probably why unions are very much so an American thing, because, you really just don't see this in other countries.
Well, they don't have the liberty to choose that either. But I'm not for unions in pretty much any way. And like you said, it was kind of started. Now safety's not really the goal there. We have OSHA and other things that are in charge of safety. So I guess they got in at the right time and it made it work. I do want to go back over to your point, though, on what exactly they're asking for. That $5 increase is per year over the contract. So, the workers there currently make between $20 an hour and $39 an hour. So if you're somebody somewhere in the middle, like $30 an hour, if you look at a $5 per year increase, that's $5 an hour, right? So now you're in 6 years when that contract's up, you're up another 30. You just doubled your salary from 30 to 60 in 6 years. I wouldn't say that's reasonable. Now, there has been a counter to that at $250, which I believe is much, much more reasonable. It's still a 50% increase over the next 6 years. That, to me, still sounds kind of ridiculous, but at the same time, we saw how much inflation has played a toll, especially down here in Florida and a lot of different places, but here in Florida, we definitely feel it. So I can understand it. I hope that they do get to an agreement here soon. A lot rides on these ports. To me, just using common sense, it's kind of ridiculous that a port could ever close down. Honestly, I think those things should be running 24/7. I don't understand I don't understand some ports that take lunch breaks. That blows my mind. We've got tons and tons and tons and tons of containers coming in on each one of these ships of cargo that everybody's waiting on. That's so important, some of them too. And you take a lunch break and you can't take something down. To me, I don't understand it at all. It should be a 24/7 job as long as there's the demand for it. Now, if everything's off, then everybody goes home, the job's done, it is what it is. And I understand that sometimes there's just not that demand, depending on how many ships come in at once. But yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. I do hope the administration gets involved, at least for now, on postponing the deadline so that these containers at this time, even if it's for just a few weeks, that gives them more time. That could avert, that could completely avoid a shutdown to begin with, because it gives them a lot more time to try to work this out. And
the way that it works, though, it's not as simple as the government saying, hey, go back to work. And this is an entirely other podcast, and you can research that, but the Taft-Hartley Act is what the president would enact, which forces, right now, the ILA, the International Longshoremen Association, is refusing to come back to the negotiation table. So what enacting the Taft-Hartley Act does, it forces both sides back to the table. It gives you an 80-day window. But during that 80-day window, it strips all the unions of their union rights. Every place where a union is, you become a right-to-work state without any union protection. Meaning, you can be fired if you're saying, I'm going to strike, your boss say, okay, you're fired. You do not have the union to fall back on. So, they can do that and force them back to work. But again, it's only, and I think in what I read, I didn't see any instances where those 80 days expired and they went full strike beyond that. I read something in 2002, Bush threatened to just remove the rights to port workers altogether and move them back Rail workers don't have the same protections as the port does. And with that, he got everyone's act together and they got back to work. This seems a little bit more complicated, but like I said, the only way really that we have as America, the tool we have is that Taft-Hartley Act to force them back to work, strip them of the union rights, and hopefully, in that 80-day window, they can come to an agreement. But it would keep the doors open and everything flowing.
I know that doesn't necessarily sound good. It sounds kind of like a bad thing. I'm just going to say I wouldn't, it gives you 80 days to clean house, it sounds like. And that doesn't sound like it's probably too much of a bad thing, depending on the kind of workforce that you have. If you have a lot of guys there that are lazy, that use the union as a scapegoat almost to be able to not work and do those things, where you have these other guys that are, it's the 80-20 rule, right? Are 20% of the guys doing all the work and 80% are not doing anything at all, and now they're being protected?
For sure.
Yeah.
When I worked the head of a union, it was a 90-10, and I was the 10 for sure. Yeah, it is an excuse to definitely not work. But
I have a merit-based belief system. It's at the very core. It is based on merit. It starts there, it ends there. So, there's obviously exceptions. You have somebody who works really hard and then they get hurt. Does the company take care of them? Absolutely. You're loyal to that person, and that's how it goes because they're unable, right? That's different. When somebody's just not working, and they're just lazy or just not,
right.
they want something that's unreasonable, like a $5 an hour for the next 6 years increase. That's probably unreasonable.
Right.
You got to
this
be able
is the
to,
bad. This is what unions have evolved into, the bad evolution of it almost. But going to your point, it would almost be smart for the government to enact a Taft-Hartley Act to weed out those who aren't playing ball. And then, hey, you want to automate the ports? Well, here you go. This is the prime time to do it now that, half the workforce just got let go.
So let's talk about that really fast, though, because this is more, at least that part of it's more like the writer's strike, right? We just saw that. It was about a year ago or so where the writers all got together and they said, hey, AI is bad and we need to make sure that we keep our jobs. I can understand that. AI, my personal opinion, AI is the worst thing to ever happen to us, and I think it's going to do more evil than it's ever done, and it's going to completely
100%.
just destroy most of what we hold dear as humans,
Originality.
and we're not going to appreciate much of anything. However, to your point, automating warehouses and automating things and getting robots involved is inevitable. The rest of the world doesn't care that we don't like it. You do it or you get left behind. I get that part of it too. It's so sad, honestly. It's a terrible, terrible thing because I really don't want to see what it looks like in 100 years. I could be wrong, but I don't see
hey, we still have the same subways from 100 years ago and the same train systems from 100 years ago. So,
well, we do. The rest of the countries don't. They have
right.
rail systems
and that's
because
because of unions. If it wasn't for unions,
so.
We probably would have, bullet trains and, high-tech transportation. It's funny, we're America, greatest country in the world, and we have Civil War era trains and.
We are the greatest country in the world.
I'm saying we are. I'm just saying we gotta embrace a little bit more of the technology and other things like that, though.
Well, we're the ones who come up with most of the technology, honestly. Right over there in Silicon Valley, we come up with this technology. The rest of the world embraces it. A lot of people here don't. And I understand. Again, I'm not really for it. I wish it could all go away, but it's not going to, so you have to embrace it. It's either do that or get left behind, especially, if you're trying to do business. Imagine calling, still using, DAT by the phone book. Right? Dial a truck by the phone book. I'll throw a picture up here so you guys can see how it used to be. And imagine, doing that while everybody else is using the internet. That's kind of what we're running into right now. And so
that's a perfect analogy.
And if you look at kind of the ships that come into the United States, you think we get big ships in the United States? Not even close. Our ports aren't designed or capable to take the real ships that other countries take. These massive, massive ships. It's not even comparable. So that's all the questions I had for you. Julian, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll be putting together another one here soon.
Take care, everyone.
Good luck, everybody.
Comments below.